He was a warrior forged in the crucible of chaos, a Navy SEAL sent home not by the enemy, but by a war that refused to end within his own mind. A relentless winter had devoured the Amarillo plains as he steered his truck toward the skeletal silhouette of his grandfather's forgotten farmhouse. He clung to the desperate hope that its silence could finally muffle the echoes of combat. But no family awaited him. No welcoming lights, only snow wind and ghosts that never learned to rest. Then his canine companion went rigid. A low guttural growl rumbled from deep in his chest. In the gloom he saw them faint impressions, footprints far too small for a threat. When he threw the door open, he was braced for a fight. But what stood before him wasn't an adversary. It was a woman trembling with a soul-deep fear. She used her own body as a fragile shield for her children, her eyes wild with the terror of prey caught in a blinding light. He came to this place seeking solitude to heal. He never imagined that healing itself would come knocking on his desolate door. Before this story unfolds, please tell us where you're joining us from. And if their journey touches your heart, we ask that you subscribe so you never miss these tales of courage and connection. Your presence here truly means everything to us. A heavy blanket of snow smothered the vast plains of Amarillo, Texas, erasing the harsh lines of the land, creating a dangerous illusion of peace. Lieutenant Ethan Mercer gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. His jaw clenched against an unseen enemy as he stared down the narrow, unforgiving road. It was a path that sliced through desolate white fields and the haunting ribs of skeletal fences. At 33, his very posture broadcast a lifetime of service as a Navy SEAL. He was tall, broad-shouldered, a powerhouse of coiled muscle hidden beneath layers of civilian clothing. His hair, once cut to severe military precision, was now a slightly softer shadow. A dark stubble traced the hard line of his jaw, lending a fragile softness to a face that had been chiseled by years of unrelenting discipline, profound fatigue, and iron restraint. His gray eyes were unnervingly still, a habit born not of focus, but from surviving places where a single blink could be your last. In the passenger seat sat Ranger, a magnificent 9-year-old German shepherd, his coat a classic tapestry of deep black and tan. A subtle dusting of gray now frosted his muzzle. His body, though still powerful, moved with a new, measured economy, yet his ears remained a constant vigilant radar, swiveling and twitching, capturing every whisper of the wind. Ranger had been Ethan's shadow, his other half, through countless harrowing operations. They had endured the thunder of explosions, the stealth of midnight insertions, and the suffocating tension of waiting in hostile silence. If war had carved Ethan from stone, it had forged Ranger in fire loyal to his very soul, a storm of calm, until the moment he was unleashed. Then, as always, the pain came without warning. An agonizing pressure began to build behind Ethan's eyes, followed by a searing flash of white light that tore at the edges of his vision. He swallowed hard, breathing through the onslaught, refusing to yield. The military physicians had labels for his condition. PTSD, a mild TBI terms that defined everything yet explained so little. But what truly mattered was the raw truth beneath those labels. His entire nervous system was on a constant, relentless alert. His body remained coiled, primed for a battle that was long over. And that was the very reason he was here now. 3 days ago, his commander had summoned him. A man in his 50s with a spine of steel and a kindness veiled by brutal honesty. "You don't just walk away when your weapon jams," the commander had stated, his voice so low. "You stop, you clear the jam, you survive. Right now, Mercer, you are the weapon that's jammed." Ethan offered no argument. He never did. "Go home," the commander had added. "Or find a place that feels like it. Christmas is just around the corner. Even warriors need a place to lower their guard." Ethan obeyed the order just as he always had. But the idea of home was simply not an option. His parents lived 3 hours to the east. They hadn't exchanged a word in more than a decade. When Ethan enlisted at 19, they had pleaded with him to learn a trade instead. to become a mechanic, an electrician, anything but a soldier. And when he refused, a silent fracture formed between them. His letters were met with silence. His calls went unanswered. In time, he simply stopped trying. The farmhouse materialized through the swirling snow like a ghost of a memory that refused to fade. It had once belonged to his grandfather, Grandpa Thunder. The old man was a Vietnam veteran, a force of nature, loud, warm, and utterly impossible to ignore. His laugh was like rolling thunder, and his stories only softened when Ethan was close. "My little lightning bolt," he would always say, as he tousled Ethan's hair. That farm had been their sanctuary. Countless fishing trips, stacks of firewood chopped and piled by hand. Quiet mornings where the silence felt like a comforting blanket, not a threat. Grandpa Thunder died when Ethan was 16, a heart attack during a violent spring storm. Thunder roared outside. A storm of grief raged inside. After the funeral, the farm had been shuttered, locked away, and no one ever touched it again. Ethan eased off the gas as he neared the gate. A deep sense of unease settled over him. The old wooden gate? It stood straighter than his memory served. The snow blanketing the path was disturbed. There were footprints, small ones, far too light to be from any animal. A faint scent drifted on the air, something that had no place in an abandoned home. It was the smell of smoke, of fresh wood recently burned. Ranger lifted his head, his entire body going rigid. A low growl rumbled deep in his chest. It wasn't aggression, but a clear warning. His tail fell still. His gaze was fixed, unblinking on the farmhouse. Ethan cut the engine, and a heavy silence descended, shattered only by wind sweeping snow over the frozen earth. He climbed out his boots, crunching softly, his breath a white mist. Pure instinct took over. He swept his eyes over the windows. No lights, but new curtains hung where there had been none before. Ranger moved ahead of him, placing his body between Ethan and the porch. "Easy," Ethan murmured, his voice a low, steady rumble. They reached the door. The wood was impossibly warm to the touch. Ethan's hand froze on the knob. His pulse hammered not from fear, but from something far more profound. A feeling that whatever waited on the other side could never be unseen. He opened the door. Warm air spilled out, carrying the scent of soup and damp wool. Inside, a woman stood. She went rigid the moment she saw him. She was young, in her late 20s at most. Slender but worn down to the bone by exhaustion. Her dark, almost black hair was pulled into a loose braid streaked with melted frost. Wet strands clung to her face. Her skin had a warm copper undertone, but it was ghostly pale now, stretched tight with terror. Her eyes were dark, wide, and sharp with a fierce protective fire. She lurched forward, putting herself between Ethan and 3 small shadows behind her. Children. One was clinging to her leg. Another stood just back, chin lifted, trying to feign courage. The smallest was bundled in her arms, cheeks flushed with fever, breath coming in shallow gasps. The woman's shoulders trembled violently. She did not scream. She did not run. She simply held her ground. Ranger stopped at the threshold, watching, ears forward, but his posture was calm. His low growl faded into nothing. Ethan's heart pounded against his ribs. He hadn't come here for people. He had come here to feel nothing at all. And yet, standing in his own grandfather's farmhouse, facing a trembling stranger shielding her children like a final desperate line of defense, Ethan realized a truth he hadn't allowed himself to face. The silence hadn't healed him. It had only hollowed him out, making room for something else to enter. The room remained frozen for several heartbeats, as if every person inside was waiting to see who would break the spell first. Maya Redbird Collins stood rigid near the center of the farmhouse living room. At 28, she looked younger, her body slim to the point of utter fragility. Her shoulders hunched inward from endless weeks of vigilance and biting cold. Her long, nearly black hair was woven into a loose braid down her back, with stray strands escaping to frame a face carved by both softness and sheer endurance. The warm bronze of her Comanche heritage colored her skin, but exhaustion had stolen its glow, leaving deep shadows pooled beneath her eyes. Those eyes, dark and haunted, flickered between Ethan and the powerful canine at his side, measuring the threat the way cornered prey does when there is absolutely nowhere left to flee. She did not retreat. Instead, she edged forward, positioning herself as an unwavering shield before her children. Lily, all of 6 years old, stood pressed against her mother's hips so thin, with straight brown hair cut in jagged, uneven lines, as if trimmed by a hand that trembled with fatigue. Her chin was lifted in a show of defiance, though the truth of her fear was told by the trembling fingers twisting the hem of her sweater. She was old enough to comprehend terror, and old enough to decide that true courage meant standing perfectly still when every part of her screamed to run. June 3 clutched a threadbare doll to her small chest. Her curls framed a round face streaked with soot and the salt of old tears. One small thumb hovered near her mouth, as if she were uncertain that seeking comfort was still allowed. Her eyes darted between Ethan and Ranger, a child's curiosity at war with primal instinct. Rosie, barely 1 year old, was bundled tightly in Maya's arms. Her cheeks were flushed a feverish red from the unforgiving cold. Her lips were parted as she breathed with a faint, fragile wheeze, a sound both shallow and terribly steady. She smelled of milk, damp wool, and the icy winter air. Maya's hands clenched on the baby's coat. "Please," she whispered, her voice low and broken. It wasn't loud enough to be begging, but it was perilously close. "We won't be any trouble. We make no noise. We can stay completely out of your way." Ethan pulled the door shut behind him. The rush of wind silenced in an instant. The sharp click of the latch seemed to echo with a chilling finality. He took a single step forward, his boots heavy and loud against the wooden floor. Up close, his size was an undeniable presence. He filled the space even without a uniform. A man of broad shoulders and formidable power, the kind of man whose presence alone shifted the very air in a room. His face remained a calm mask, but his eyes missed nothing. Not the tension in Maya's shoulders, not the way Lily leaned protectively toward June, not the way baby Rosie's breathing hitched as the reality of their situation settled in. Ranger advanced beside him, halting a few feet short and sitting without a word. His tail lay still on the old floorboards, his ears sharp and attentive, yet his body held a neutral calm. A single sniff of the air, and his gaze shifted to Lily, watching her with an unnerving, quiet intensity. Maya felt her own breath catch in her throat. Slowly, Ethan raised a hand, his palm open in a gesture of peace. "He won't hurt you," he promised, his voice a low, deep rumble, calm and measured the sound of a man accustomed to control. "He's trained." The words were meant to soothe, but they did nothing to quell the terror coiling in Maya's stomach. But then Ranger did the last thing she expected. He lowered his powerful head gently, easing his body to the floor until his chin rested on his paws. Lily could only stare. "He's lying down." She breathed the words, barely a whisper. Ranger's tail gave a single, slow, deliberate thump against the wood. Maya swallowed hard. Ethan's eyes found hers again. "How long have you been staying here?" For a heartbeat, Maya hesitated before the truth tumbled out. "A few nights." And before that, she shook her head, a barely perceptible motion. "We were on the road for a while." "From where?" Maya's lips tightened into a thin line, her gaze falling to Rosie's feverish face. We don't have anywhere else to go." Ethan didn't press for more. He'd learned a long time ago that silence could draw out truths that forceful questions would only bury. His gaze swept across the room, taking it all in. This farmhouse was no longer the hollow, empty shell of his memory. A small, brave fire crackled in the stone hearth. Blankets were folded with care on the old couch. A pot simmered on the stove, releasing the fragile scent of broth and onions. Someone had swept these floors. Someone had tried to make this place a home. "You thought this place was abandoned." Ethan stated the words an observation, not an accusation. Maya gave a sharp nod. "It was so dark. There were no tracks, no signs of life." We never imagined someone would return." She pulled her shoulders back, gathering what little resolve she had left. "If you want us to leave, we'll go. We can take shelter in the barn, anywhere. We just need a little more time. For my girls." Her voice fractured on that final desperate plea. Ethan felt that all too familiar pressure build behind his eyes, the warning drumbeat of an oncoming headache. He forced himself to focus on his breath. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Slow. Beside him, Ranger shifted almost imperceptibly closer to Lily, never touching her, but creating a warm, solid presence beside her. June crouched down, peeking at him from behind her mother's legs. "Doggy," she whispered. Ranger's ears twitched at the sound, but he remained utterly still. Ethan's gaze returned to Maya, but he truly saw her this time. He saw the way she positioned her body as a shield between him and her children. He saw the fear warring with a fierce resolve, the profound exhaustion carved into her every line. "Winter is a merciless force out here." His voice was low, almost a murmur. "Without a roof over your head, you won't survive." Maya gave a solemn nod. It was a truth she knew in her very soul. A muscle in Ethan's jaw twitched. His gaze drifted toward the window where snow fell in a heavy, soundless curtain. His commander's orders echoed in his mind, "Stand down, fix the weapon." He turned back to her. "You can stay," he said. "Not forever, but until this chaos settles. At least until the winter breaks." Maya blinked once, then twice, as if processing a foreign language. "You mean inside?" She breathed the question, barely audible. "Yes." The world tilted her knees, threatening to give way. She gripped the table to steady herself, a silent, unstoppable flood of tears finally breaking free. She began to nod again and again, as if the motion itself could keep his offer from vanishing. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Thank you." Ethan offered a single curt nod in return, the immense burden of his decision already settling upon his shoulders. Ranger rose to his feet, closing the small gap between them, and pressed his nose gently into Lily's small hand. For the first time all night, a collective breath of relief seemed to fill the room. Morning arrived quietly at the farmhouse, not with the blare of sirens or the bark of orders, but with the quiet groans of old wood and the mournful whisper of wind over snow. As always, Ethan was awake long before the sun. His body's internal clock had long ago forgotten the luxury of sleeping in. Years of deployment had conditioned him to rise before the light, to meet the day before its dangers could find him. He now sat at the small kitchen table, his hands wrapped around a mug for warmth, his gaze lost somewhere in the distance as he listened to the house breathe. The walls groaned faintly against the encroaching cold. From a room deep within a child's soft cough broke the silence, then faded. Outside, Ranger maintained his vigil on the porch, his back straight, his ears alert, scanning the bleak horizon as though he were guarding the last sacred place on earth. At 9 years old, his body moved with more deliberation, but his watchful spirit remained as sharp as ever. A delicate layer of frost clung to his whiskers. When Ethan stepped out to survey the property, Ranger acknowledged him with a single slow thump of his tail against the wood, his gaze never wavering from his post. Inside, Maya was already stirring. She padded silently on bare feet, the frigid floorboards a familiar penance, her movements precise so as not to wake the girls. This was instinct now, not just caution. She had learned the hard way that sound was an invitation for disaster. With practiced, almost ceremonial motions, she bound her dark hair with a frayed strip of cloth. A deep primal fear was etched into her very bones, but the simple act of routine was an anchor in the storm. This farmhouse had stood silent for 16 years. Their pantry held no reserves. Their systems were long silent. Everything they relied on now had been painstakingly rebuilt from the ruins. It was a world Maya had forged with patience, not with coin. Behind the shed, a few hens pecked at the frozen ground, their feathers dull but healthy, scratching through the snow for the grain she rationed with a careful hand. Near the fence, an old chestnut horse stood sentinel, his ribs a faint shadow beneath his winter coat. His name was Jonah. He was slow and gentle, and stubborn in that way of creatures who had once known better days. He drew water when his strength allowed, and stood as a living shield when the storms descended. Each dawn, Maya would make her rounds, whispering to them in a soft mix of English and Comanche. It was a language passed down from her mother. By the door she had hung a small wind charm, a fragile thing of beads and bits of bone that clinked with a faint whisper whenever the air stirred. The sound was light, delicate, yet it was constant. A quiet testament that she was still here. By the time Ethan returned, the scent of hot food had filled the small kitchen. A pot of chili simmered on the stove, a beacon of warmth. Cornbread baked low and slow in the oven. Coffee brewed dark and strong. Ethan froze the moment he took his first sip. It was exactly as it should be. He said nothing, but Maya saw the way his shoulders dropped, just a fraction, the way he didn't recoil after the first swallow. Not long after, the girls began to wake. Lily padded into the kitchen first, her sweater sleeves pulled down over her small hands. She cast a glance at Ethan, then at Ranger through the glass before crouching to whisper something into the dog's ear. Ranger listened with a profound seriousness, as if he had just been entrusted with a sacred duty. June followed behind her, dragging her doll by one limp arm, her curls a chaotic halo from her sleep. She planted her feet in front of Ranger and commanded, "Sit." Ranger didn't so much as twitch. June scowled, but then the expression dissolved into a sudden laugh. "He's stubborn like Mommy." Rosie came crawling last, all clumsy determination as her hand slapped against the floor. She made a beeline right for Ethan's boots, tugging at the laces with a squeal of absolute delight. Ethan froze, completely uncertain if he should move or simply remain a statue. Ranger solved the impasse for him, lowering his head, allowing Rosie to gently grasp his ear. Her laughter filled the space, a sound so bright and unguarded. Something deep inside Ethan's chest finally gave way. This was Ranger, the dog, who had faced the roar of gunfire without so much as flinching. He trotted after the girls through the snow later that morning, his paws slipping once, sending him skidding sideways. June's laughter echoed so full and free, it toppled her backward into a soft drift. Lily clapped her hands in delight. From the porch, Ethan watched, transfixed by the sight of his old dog rolling in the snow, like a pup half his age, carving crooked tracks that crisscrossed the yard like reckless signatures. It had been a lifetime since anything in this place had felt so vibrantly alive. That afternoon, as Maya folded laundry by the fire's warmth, and the girls etched pictures onto scraps of cardboard, the stillness was broken by the buzz of Ethan's phone. The military doctor's voice came through a calm, firm current from a world away, reminding him to sidestep stress to keep his nervous system from flaring, to accept that healing was not a state of inactivity, but one of regulation. Ethan absorbed the words without a single interruption. After the call ended, a heavy stillness held him in his chair. He stared through the window where the girls were chasing Ranger in wide, slow circles, their laughter a fragile sound against the cold. "I'm learning the hardest mission," he whispered, his voice a secret in the quiet room. "Learning how to be still without feeling utterly useless." That evening, the farmhouse glowed a haven of warmth. Maya ladled soup with a steady hand, setting bowls before the girls and then for herself. She watched Ethan from the corner of her eye, a silent, cautious observer, noting the deliberate way he ate, slow and methodical, as if weighing every motion. A man conditioned to survive chaos, now learning the foreign landscape of a dinner table. She felt a strange flutter beneath her ribs. It wasn't hope that was far too reckless, but something quieter, something that felt perilously close to relief. Later, after the girls were asleep, curled into each other beneath layers of heavy quilts, Maya stood by the window as snow drifted down in ghostly sheets. Ranger lay near the door, chin on his paws. Ethan was across the room, meticulously cleaning the mud from his boots. For the first time in weeks, Maya allowed herself a full breath, one not spent mentally mapping exits. For the first time in years, Ethan allowed himself to sit in a space where no one looked to him to save their world. Outside, the wind carried the faint, haunting chime of beads and bone, a sound both light and persistent, pushing back against the immense dark. The snow fell thick and relentless that night, pressing against the farmhouse windows, as if the world beyond was being solely unwritten. Inside, the fire held its vigil low and steady, its amber light stretched across the wooden walls like a warm, protective hand, transforming the timber's knots into long shadows that danced like restless memories refusing to be still. The girls were already asleep, nestled together beneath quilts that swallowed their small frames, their breaths soft and uneven, whispers after a long, cold day. Ethan fed another log to the flames and stepped away. Ranger lay near the hearth, his old body a protective crescent, his eyes half-lidded, but ever watchful, never truly surrendering to sleep. The firelight painted the old dog's coat in shifting tones. His black fur was traced in amber, his chest rising and falling with a rhythm that seemed to anchor the entire room. Maya sat cross-legged on the rug, her hands cradling a chipped mug, as if for warmth. In the flickering glow, she seemed changed, her defenses finally beginning to fall. Attention still lingered in her posture, but it was no longer the sharp coil of a creature poised for flight. Her dark hair fell loosely over a single shoulder, catching embers of crimson from the fire. Her face, a map of grief and resilience, softened as her gaze fell upon the sleeping children. "They always fall asleep faster near a fire," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "My mother said it tells the body it's finally safe." Ethan could only nod, not yet trusting his own voice. Maya stared deep into her mug for a long moment before speaking again, as if deciding whether the words were allowed to exist outside the confines of her heart. "My father, he was Army," she began. "A white man from Oklahoma. White man. He wasn't a warrior like in the stories. He was disaster response. Floods, brutal storms, search and rescue missions." A faint, bittersweet smile touched her lips. "He got lost on a winter relief mission one time. The snow just appeared out of nowhere. No signal, no way to see the roads. He was certain he was going to freeze to death out there." Her eyes met Ethan's, the fire dancing within them. "My mother found him." Ethan remained perfectly still, captivated. She was Comanche, a small woman but with a strong back and eyes that missed nothing. She could read the wind like most people read a map. She followed the trail of broken branches, the way snow clung to the blades of grass, and she brought him home. She sat him right by the fire, gave him soup, and didn't even ask his name until the shaking finally stopped. A warmth bloomed in Maya's voice as she spoke each word carefully, placing a piece of her past back where it belonged. They loved each other because they respected one another. That was the foundation. She swallowed hard. "When I was just a little girl, I believed my father was a superhero. He's the one who taught me knots, military knots. He'd say if you can tie something the right way, it won't fail when it counts." A faint, bittersweet laugh escaped her lips. "He'd take me fishing, but we always let them go. He'd say real strength isn't about taking whatever you can get." Her eyes glistened, then not with tears, but with the memory threatening to spill over. "He taught me to be still in the forest, to listen instead of speak. He always said the loud ones, they miss everything that truly matters." A knot formed in Ethan's chest. "When I was just 10, Maya continued, her voice trembling. "There was an avalanche, a sudden wall of snow. They were inside the house. But I wasn't. I was at a neighbor's." Her knuckles whitened around the mug. They were gone before anyone could ever reach them. The fire popped in the silence. Maya did not cry, not yet. She had told this story to herself too many times for the tears to come easily. "After that, I was put into the system," she said, her voice hollow. "Foster homes, temporary families. Some of them were kind. Some were not. Most had no idea what to do with a quiet little girl who recoiled from their touch." A new edge crept into her voice, hard as steel. They just kept sending me back, said I couldn't bond, said I scared their other children. Ethan watched her, his gaze unwavering, seeing the price those words still exacted from her. I aged out at 18, Maya went on. Worked nights, diners, gas stations, anything that paid the bills. She paused, and a flicker of softness entered her voice. I met Tyler when I was 21. Ethan recognized the name. He remained silent. He was so gentle, Maya whispered. An electrician, a hard worker. He never tried to fix me. He just stayed. Her lower lip trembled. We had 3 girls. He loved them like he loved breathing. Her gaze dropped to the floor. His father never liked me. He never said it out loud. It was just the looks that lingered too long. The questions that felt sharp like I was always on trial. She exhaled a long, shaky breath. His mother tried, though. She loved the girls, and in her own quiet way she loved me. The fire cracked again, loud in the stillness. A month ago, Tyler died. An accident at work. Maya squeezed her eyes shut, and then the rest of the world. She didn't have to explain anymore. The memory of that first winter night lived too close to her skin always. When she finally fell silent, the room felt heavier, fuller, as though it now held the weight of every life she'd lost. Ethan spoke then, his voice rough with disuse. My grandfather died when I was 16, he said. Heart attack. During a thunderstorm, the noise was everywhere. He stared into the fire, seeing a different storm entirely. He was the very soul of Vietnam, boisterous, overflowing with warmth, his presence so vast, it filled a room just by his breathing. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. He used to call me his lightning kid. He'd say I had the speed, but lacked the wisdom to know when to strike and when to stand perfectly still. The smile vanished. The day he died, an unbearable silence descended upon our home. A quiet, so profound it was deafening. Maya just listened motionless. I chose to enlist at 19. It was the last thing my parents wanted. They were haunted by the fear I'd come back shattered, or simply not come back at all. His jaw clenched. They argued that fixing machines could save people just as much as carrying a rifle. Ethan's hands balled into fists, an unconscious reflex. I told them I needed to protect people, not just piece together what was already broken. He swallowed hard against a rising tightness in his throat. That was the last time they answered my calls. A heavy silence filled the space between them, not one of awkwardness, but of a deeply shared understanding. I lost myself in the work, Ethan continued. Non-stop training. Deployment missions stacked one on top of the other, no leave, no room to think. His gaze drifted to Ranger. He was the only one who didn't leave. Mia looked at the loyal dog. Then her eyes returned to Ethan. Her expression softened, not with pity, but with the painful weight of recognition. They remained that way for a long time, 2 people whose entire lives had been carved out by absence more than they had ever been by presence. Outside, the snow continued its silent descent. Inside, the fire burned low, yet its warmth seemed to deepen. For the first time in their shared remembering, neither of them felt utterly alone. The days that followed unfolded with the unhurried grace of falling snow, each hour settling gently upon the last. Their morning routines began to transform into something that felt almost sacredly tender. Ethan still woke in the pre-dawn darkness, but now instead of emptiness, the house answered him with the quiet hum of life. Lily, just 6 years old and as slender as a sapling, tried so desperately to be a grown-up. She would fold the blankets with painstakingly perfect corners while Mia rested, then turn away thinking she was unseen to quickly wipe the tears from her eyes. Responsibility was a coat 2 sizes too big for her small shoulders, and yet she wore it every day, her chin held high. June, a wonderfully stubborn 3-year-old, treated rules as mere suggestions. She demanded Ethan read her bedtime story precisely 3 times per page. The same tone, the exact pauses, the very same silly voice for the bear character. If he missed a single word or dared to change the rhythm, she would cross her arms and declare with a solemn authority, "That's not how Daddy did it." Ethan learned quickly that precision here mattered more than tactics on any battlefield ever had. And then Rosie, who was barely one, was beautifully simple. She craved the warmth of his steady arms, the quiet rhythm of his breathing. When Ethan held her just so, her tiny hand would clench his shirt, and a smile would bloom across her face so radiant it felt like the sun had broken into the room. The sight of it shattered him every single time. Ranger observed it all with a quiet, knowing approval. The 9-year-old German shepherd shadowed the girls from room to room, his ears twitching at every sound, his tail offering a gentle wag only when invited. He became a silent sentinel beside Rosie's crib at night, one great paw stretched out a furry barrier guarding the very edges of her innocent dreams. While he still patrolled the yard, his true mission was now within these walls. The world shifted on a pale afternoon, under a sky the color of tarnished tin. Maya had insisted on managing the chores herself. Ethan's protests were brushed aside with a weary smile. "I've handled worse," she assured him. "I will be careful." But she wasn't. Near the horse shed, ice had laid a trap, a thin, invisible sheet across the frozen ground. As Maya carried a heavy bucket of warm water toward Jonah's trough, her boot found no purchase. The world tilted and fell away. White-hot pain shot up her leg as she crashed to the earth, a sharp cry torn from her lungs. From the porch, Ethan heard it. He was at her side in a flash, kneeling, his hands impossibly steady as he examined her ankle. It was already beginning to swell, the skin turning an angry, inflamed red. "I'm fine," Maya gasped through clenched teeth, though her face was ghost white. "Just help me up." He didn't argue. He lifted her gently into his arms, supporting her full weight, while Ranger circled them, whining with distress. Inside, Maya sank onto the couch, biting her lip to stifle the tears as Ethan began to wrap her ankle. She tried to form an apology, but he silenced her with a look that left no room for debate. "I've got the girls," he said, his tone absolute. "You rest." What came next was a special kind of chaos. Ethan had disarmed explosives under immense pressure. He had navigated treacherous night dives and survived the most hostile terrain. Nothing in his past had prepared him for feeding a 1-year-old with a spoon. Rosie, with a delighted shriek, began testing the laws of gravity by launching mashed food directly onto his chest. Ethan froze, his eyes wide as if instinctively calculating the blast radius. June laughed so hard she tipped over backward. Lily gasped, then darted in to help, grabbing a cleaning cloth with more frantic energy than precision. And Ranger, convinced he was being helpful, snatched a clean diaper from the bag and began a victory lap through the housetail held high like a captured trophy. June scrambled after him, squealing with laughter, shouting orders. Lily, with a teacher's sternness, chided them both. In the chaos, Ethan scorched the rice. Acrid smoke choked the kitchen. June sniffed the air and declared, "It smells like a war zone." Ethan couldn't find the will to argue. By afternoon, he was collapsed on the floor back against the couch. Rosie asleep on his chest, her breath a warm and steady tide. June had nestled against his shoulder thumb in her mouth, her eyelids heavy with sleep. Lily sat nearby, sketching quietly, her gaze lifting every few minutes to ensure her mother was still resting. From the couch, Maya watched her ankle propped up, a blanket drawn over her legs. She witnessed how Ethan didn't flinch from the mess, the noise, the sheer need. He stayed. He adapted. He softened. For the first time in an eternity, she felt a tightly wound knot inside her begin to loosen, a bandage being unwound slowly, so carefully. That night, after the girls had finally drifted off, and Ranger was curled by the hearth, Ethan cleaned the kitchen in absolute silence. Maya observed him the way his hands now moved with a deliberate gentleness, as if he were learning an entirely new language. "You don't have to do all this," she whispered. He glanced at her. Then his eyes returned to the sink. "I know," he said. "I want to." She could only nod, a wave of emotion tightening her throat. Later, as the fire burned to embers, Ethan sat on the floor again, his back resting against the couch where Maya lay. The house smelled of faint smoke and clean soap. Outside, the wind whispered against the walls, but it held no menace. Ethan closed his eyes. For once his hands were dirty, not with oil or blood, but with spilled food and fireplace ash. For once his heart was consumed by something other than constant vigilance. He didn't feel useless. He felt essential. And Maya, watching his chest rise and fall in sync with her sleeping child, understood a truth she had not dared to hope for. Some people don't run away when life becomes cluttered and loud. Some people stay, even when staying means surrendering all control. The snow continued its descent, patient and quiet, layering the world outside, while something warm and fragile began to take root inside the walls of the farmhouse. The snow was falling hard by morning, thick flakes blurring the edges of the world until the farmhouse felt entirely cut off. Then the sudden roar of an engine shattered the quiet. Ethan heard it first. Ranger shot up from his place on the porch, ears sharp, his body tense but perfectly controlled. Through the blinding white, a dark pickup truck materialized, rolling to a silent stop by the gate. A figure emerged, moving with deliberate slowness, his boots breaking the stillness with a heavy crunch, his hands held out where they could be seen. He was young, in his early 20s, with a lean, powerful frame and a rigid posture that spoke of recent military discipline. His dark blonde hair was shorn close to his scalp, a military precision that hadn't yet faded. His features were sharply defined, the hard angles of his jawline softened only by the lingering innocence of youth, but his eyes held a flicker of uncertainty, a silent contradiction to the resolute confidence in his every step. The sight of him stole the air from Maya's lungs. Noah. She breathed the name a ghost on her lips. Noah Collins, 22 years old, Tyler's little brother, just discharged from the service. He wore his training like armor, a discipline that had become a second skin. He had his brother's eyes that was the part that hurt them most. The same unwavering, quiet steadiness, though they lacked the crushing weight of sorrow she knew so well, the profound loss that had yet to claim him. He pulled off his cap as he closed the distance, letting the falling snow dust his shoulders. "I've been searching for you," he said, his voice a gentle intrusion, calm and deeply respectful. "Folks in town thought you might have ended up out here." Maya took a hesitant step toward him, then faltered suddenly, adrift and uncertain of her place in the world. Ethan stood like a sentinel by the door, a silent, watchful guardian. "I've come to take you home," Noah stated, his gaze sweeping over the simple house before settling back on Maya. "Somewhere warm, somewhere safe. The girls, they don't belong out here." Maya gave a slow, reluctant nod. He wasn't wrong. Inside, the comforting warmth of the farmhouse now felt perilously fragile. Maya sat across from Noah at the table, her hands clenched so tightly in her lap her knuckles were white. Ethan remained by this window, a storm brewing in his silence, with Ranger pressed firmly against his leg. From the stairs, the girls watched their small forms huddled together, Lily's gaze sharp-filled with an understanding that went far beyond her tender age. "I don't want to be a burden." Maya's voice was barely a whisper. "You shouldn't have to fix what I've broken." But Noah just shook his head. "Your family, Maya. That's never a burden." A painful knot formed in her throat. Her eyes darted to Ethan for a fleeting moment before she forced them away. A part of her, the logical part, screamed to go with Noah, to take the path that made sense, the safe path that didn't gamble with her heart. But another part, a tender and treacherous whisper, ached at the very thought of abandoning this sanctuary where laughter had finally returned, where the quiet was a comfort, not a punishment. Her mind flooded with the image of Ethan on the floor, little Rosie fast asleep on his chest, of Ranger standing guard over her daughters by instinct of a warmth that had been built slowly, honestly. Then, a chilling memory of how quickly, how cruelly everything she cherished had been torn away before. "I'll go," she whispered the words a surrender. "Tomorrow morning," Maya finally managed her voice a fragile whisper. Noah's nod was a mixture of relief and deep respect. "I'll be back at first light." After he departed, a profound silence fell over the house, deeper than any they'd known for days. As darkness settled, the world outside plunged into a bitter cold. The fire blazed a defiant heart in the room, yet the air became thin and sharp, stinging with every breath. Rosie stirred in her sleep, and a faint cough suddenly ripped through the quiet, turning raw and harsh. A strained whistling sound followed as her breath caught shallow and jagged. The terrifying noise sliced through the room, and Maya shot bolt upright, her heart stopping cold. Rosie's tiny chest heaved frantically. A faint paleness touched her lips as pure panic ignited in her eyes, her small body fighting desperately for air. "Oh my God!" Maya choked out a sob, clutching her daughter. "Please, just please!" But Ethan was already there, a blur of motion. He took Rosie from her arms, his touch both gentle and unyielding. Every movement was deliberate, calm, and exact. He sat her upright, cradling her back to clear her airway, and then gestured for Maya to bring him some water. He then shifted the kettle closer to the flames, using the steam to moisten the punishingly dry air. "Stay with me, sweetheart," he whispered, his voice a low anchor in the storm. His tone was steady, reassuring. "Breathe." As if sensing the crisis, Ranger moved in, pressing his great body close. His massive frame radiated a steady warmth, a living shield wrapped around Ethan's legs and Rosie's small feet, defying the encroaching chill. Ethan tracked Rosie's breathing with the same laser focus he'd once used to monitor vital signs on a battlefield, counting each second, forcing his own pulse to slow. He knew this feeling all too well. It was the razor's edge between chaos and calm, and he chose calm. The minutes stretched into an agonizing eternity. Then slowly, Rosie's desperate gasps began to ease. The awful whistling faded. Her tiny frame finally went limp, sheer exhaustion pulling her back into sleep. The moment she was safe, Maya crumpled beside Ethan. Her body trembled violently now, the terror having nowhere left to hide. They remained that way for the rest of the long night, taking turns watching over her. Their hands would brush in the shared heavy silence. As the fire dwindled to embers, Ranger remained a steadfast, unmoving guardian. And then in the deep of the night, Ethan reached across the small space between them and gently took Maya's hand. It wasn't a demanding grip, just a quiet, solid presence. "I don't want you to leave," he said, his voice barely a whisper, his gaze lost in the dying flames. Maya's breath caught in her throat. "I'm scared," she confessed, the words tearing from her. "Every time I let myself stay, Isar, I lose everything." Ethan gave a slow, knowing nod. He understood that particular brand of fear down to his very bones. "I can't promise you perfect," he said softly. But what I can promise is that I won't just disappear." Her trembling fingers tightened around his for a single fraught moment, a war raging within her between hope and the instinct to let go. Outside, the snow fell without pause, a heavy, relentless curtain blanketing the world. But inside, against all odds, something incredibly fragile was holding on. A pale, clean morning broke over Amarillo. An overnight snow smoothed every edge, making the farm look as if it were born anew. Rosie was the first to wake, not with a cough or a cry, but with a soft coo and a smile that blossomed the moment she saw the light. The warmth had returned, a healthy pink to her cheeks, her breath now falling into a steady, even rhythm. Her tiny hands opened and closed as if feeling for the shape of the new day. Maya watched, barely breathing, before finally letting her own exhale. A wave of relief loosened her shoulders, letting a quiet gratitude settle where fear had spent the night. Just after sunrise, the silence was broken by the sound of tires crunching through the snow. Noah Collins was back in his pickup. He stopped at the gate, just as he had done the day before. In the daylight, he looked even younger, 22, lean and broad-shouldered. A faint shadow of a beard clung to his jaw, undecided. His eyes held the weary steadiness of a man who had been disciplined by life too early. But a gentleness was there too, something shaped by both loss and profound responsibility. He got out of the truck, slowly, hands deep in his jacket, respecting the ground he was about to walk on. Maya went out to meet him. The cold stung her lungs, but her stance was unwavering. The girls clustered behind her. Lily clutching June's hand, Rosie held close. Ranger sat at Ethan's side, a watchful yet calm presence. Noah's eyes took in the children, then the farmhouse, and then they returned to Maya. "You ready?" he asked quietly. She hesitated for only a heartbeat. "I already have a place to go," she declared. Noah blinked, taken aback. "Where?" She turned her head just enough to glance back at the house. "Here." The word landed in the snow with the weight of a vow. Noah followed her gaze until it met Ethan's. The two men stood studying each other in silence. They both carried that silent understanding born of wearing a uniform, of knowing what it means to protect something precious without being asked. Ethan held Noah's gaze without flinching. Noah gave a single sharp nod. "Take care of them," he said, his voice flat with meaning. "All of them." "I will," Ethan answered, his own voice low and certain. Noah then knelt to Lily's level, gently brushing snow from her sleeve. "You listen to your mom," he told her, then looked at June, who gazed back with a solemn curiosity. When Rosie reached for his glove, he let out a soft laugh, squeezing her tiny hand once before rising. He drove away without a backward glance. His truck dissolved into the white horizon until it was just a memory. No one waved. It wasn't necessary. A quiet Christmas dawned upon them. Near the fence, they discovered a small pine, its limbs crooked yet resilient. Ethan carefully brought it indoors, placing it near the hearth. With her tongue caught between her teeth in concentration, Lily snipped intricate stars from folded paper. June insisted on draping tinsel everywhere, even on Rears's tail, which wagged back and forth with a patient, dignified air. Rosie clapped her hands each time the lights flickered on, pure delight etched across her face. Maya fastened red ribbons to the window frames and hung a bundle of sage above the doorway. A quiet prayer escaped her lips, a whispered homage to the parents she had lost, the husband who never returned, and the fragile life that had impossibly endured. That evening, the snow returned, falling in thick, silent sheets. They gathered near the fire, the room awash in amber and gold. The girls soon fell asleep in a soft pile of blankets. Rears stretched out beside them, his chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. The world beyond the windows felt distant, completely unimportant. For a long moment, Ethan stood, hands clasped, his heart pounding harder than it ever did before a mission. "Maya?" he finally said. She looked up, her gaze meeting his. "I don't know how to promise forever," he went on, measuring each word with deliberate care. "But I do know how to choose. And I choose you, and I choose the girls every single day." He knelt the movement, unpracticed but resolute. "Stay. Be my family." A sob escaped Maya as tears spilled down her cheeks. She could only nod a silent affirmation through the weeping, her voice cracking as she finally whispered, "Yes." Later, when the house had settled into a deep quiet, Ethan's phone suddenly rang. The commander's voice came through the line, steady and familiar. "How are you holding up?" Ethan looked around the room, at their small Christmas tree, at the sleeping children, at Maya's hand resting in his. "I'm in a place that lets me breathe again," he said quietly. "I'm learning how to stay." There was a thoughtful pause on the other end, then a quiet exhale. "Take the time you need," the commander replied. "Come back to us when you're ready." Ethan ended the call, setting the phone down. Outside, the snow had draped the world in a profound silence. Inside, for the first time in so many years, Ethan Mercer was no longer running. He had finally stayed. Sometimes miracles don't announce themselves with thunder or a blinding light. Sometimes they don't arrive with a thunderclap, but with the quiet click of an unlocked door, the lingering warmth of a fire, a hand that simply won't let go. Perhaps God's plan wasn't for Ethan to escape the world at that farmhouse. Perhaps He led him there so a soldier shattered by war could become a fortress for others, so a grieving widow could learn that standing firm is its own kind of strength, and so 3 small children could finally remember the feeling of being safe. In our own stories, the most profound miracles often hide in plain sight. A second chance we never thought we'd get a stranger whose soul feels like coming home. That one moment we stop fleeing and at last choose to stay. If this story found a place in your heart, please share it with someone who is searching for hope. Let us know in the comments where this story reached you. And if you believe, join us in a silent prayer that God will place a shield of protection around you, your family, and all who are wandering through the chilling seasons of life. Subscribe for more stories that tell of healing, unwavering faith, and the grace that finds us when we least expect it. May God bless you and keep you safe.